They say pirates lived for rum, gold, and blood. But let me tell you a secret that most sailors took to their graves. None of that mattered if you couldn't eat. Out there, weeks from shore, the sea became a coffin for the unprepared. And the true battle wasn't always against Spanish galleons or naval guns, it was against hunger, thirst, and a disease called scurvy that turned strong men into shriveled corpses faster than a cannonball. Imagine the creak of timbers in the dead of night, a crew of hardened rogues lying in their hammocks, bellies gnawing empty, lips cracked from salt, teeth loosening in their gums. The surgeon had no cures, only knives. The quartermaster's ledger grew thinner by the day. And when the salted pork ran out, when the weevils in the biscuits were fatter than the flour itself, men stared at each other with the kind of hunger that made a comrade look more like meat than mate. Here's the forbidden truth. The pirate diet was the one thing that decided whether a voyage ended in riches or ended with corpses chained to the deck, too weak to haul sail. Every loaf of ship's biscuit, every barrel of salted beef, every cask of soured beer was as important as powder and shot. But this story isn't about lists of rations. It's about the desperation, the tricks, the secrets, and the dark bargains that kept men alive on seas where death was always watching. And it begins with the moment a captain lifted the lid of a rotting barrel and realized the ocean had swallowed his last hope of feeding his crew. Because what happened next wasn't just about food. It was about survival at any cost. The voyage had begun with laughter, the decks ringing with the clamor of mugs, the promise of gold, and the weight of fresh stores lashed tight in the hold. Casks of water, barrels of pork salted so heavily it stung the eyes, sacks of flour, wheels of cheese, and crates of the one food every sailor despised yet depended on, the hard biscuit. The men had cheered as the Sea Viper slipped her sails billowing white under a bright Caribbean sky, and no one thought of hunger then. Not when the wind was strong and the promise of plunder painted the horizon. But weeks at sea turn abundance into famine faster than most landsmen could imagine. By the 12th day, the biscuits were riddled with weevils. And though the men joked calling the bugs extra meat, their jokes turned bitter when mold blackened the flour and the cheese sweated to slime in the heat. By the 20th day, water stank of rot, a green scum clinging to the inside of casks. Men pinched their noses, drinking anyway, because thirst was crueler than taste. And by the 30th day, the pork that had seemed endless was gone, leaving only scraps and bones. It was on that day that the captain gathered the crew, his face grim beneath his hat. "Rations are cut," he declared, his voice hard. "Half biscuit, half water, until we make landfall." A groan rose from the deck, but none dared mutiny, not yet. Men tore their biscuits in silence, gnawing them slow, crunching weevils like grit between their teeth, swallowing them without complaint. Yet hunger grew, sharper than steel, and with it came whispers at night. In the swaying dark of the lower deck, Rourke, first mate, a scarred veteran of 3 navies and twice as many betrayals, listened as 2 young sailors muttered in their hammocks. "We'll starve before Nassau. The captain's keeping the good meat for himself. I saw him chewing fat when the rest of us had crumbs." Lies, perhaps, but hunger turns lies into gospel, and gospel into rage. By dawn, a knife had been drawn in the galley, the cook pinned against his table, accused of hoarding. He swore by his mother's bones, but when the men forced open his stores, they found only barrels of vinegar and spoiled onions. The knife didn't fall, but trust cracked that day like a spar snapping in a storm. Then came the sickness. It started with bleeding gums, then teeth dropping loose, then skin that split at the touch. Scurvy, the surgeon, drunk on his own bottle, offered boiled herbs and prayers, but men still wasted away, too weak to climb the rigging, their eyes yellowing as if the sea itself had drained them dry. One by one, they were sewn in hammocks and slid overboard, splashing into the endless blue while their shipmates chewed biscuit that tasted like sawdust. Rourke watched them go, his heart heavy, and whispered to the captain, "If we don't find fresh food soon, we'll lose them all." The captain nodded grimly. "Then we take it wherever we find it." And as if conjured by the devil's bargain, a sail appeared on the horizon that very evening, a fat merchantman, her hull low with cargo, too slow to escape. The crew's hunger sharpened into fury. Powder was brought up, cannons primed, and when the pirate flag was run to the mast, the men cheered not for gold, but for bread, for meat, for survival. The broadside thundered, splintering the merchant's stern, and soon grappling hooks pulled her close. Rourke was first over the rail, his cutlass dripping with blood before he even reached the deck, his cry echoing, "Food first, plunder second." The crew followed, a storm of desperate men, blades flashing, pistols cracking, their eyes wild not with greed but with starvation. The merchant sailors broke quickly, many throwing down arms before steel touched them, but mercy was scarce that day. The pirates swept the galley first, overturning casks, tearing open barrels, laughing like madmen at the sight of bread, dried fish, and even citrus lemons and limes rolling across the deck like treasure itself. Men fell upon them, devouring them raw, juice running down their chins, tears of relief stinging their eyes as they chewed. "By God, I can feel my teeth tightening already," one cried, and the others laughed, but it was laughter tinged with hysteria, for they knew how close they had come to ruin. Yet even in victory, shadows lingered. Rourke stood at the rail, staring at the bodies strewn across the planks, the stink of blood mixing with the sweetness of citrus. "How many more?" he muttered to himself. "How many more ships until we feed the hunger that never dies?" The captain clapped his shoulder, eyes cold. "As many as it takes." But the question haunted Rourke still, for in the pirate life, hunger was never beaten, it was only delayed. The merchantman's plunder should have been salvation. Yet within days, the dream of abundance began to sour. Because food on a ship is not a treasure chest, but a candle burning faster than anyone expects. And the sea vipers crooned with relief after weeks of gnawing hunger rate, like wolves let loose, tearing into bread as though it would never end, chewing dried fish until their jaws ached, sucking citrus until their gums bled. And though their bellies swelled and their laughter returned, the stores dwindled, the bread molding in the damp, the fish turning rancid in the heat, the lemons shriveling into bitter husks. And soon the same shadow returned, darker than before, because now the men knew the taste of relief and could not bear its loss, and the fear of famine gnawed harder than famine itself. The hold reeked of rot, the water casks grew slimy, and by the third week, Rourke counted the supplies and realized with a sinking gut that they had maybe 10 days before the ship turned coffin again. And when he told the captain, the man's jaw clenched tight, his eyes fixed on the horizon where no sail showed. 10 days, he muttered. Then we take another. That's all there is. But Rourke heard the strain in his voice, the knowledge that luck runs thinner than biscuit crumbs. And as night fell and the men slumped in hammocks, the air thick with sweat and hunger, Rourke felt a greater rot than spoiled food spreading paranoia, despair, all invisible but more deadly than scurvy. The crew began hoarding crumbs, hiding them in boots and hammocks, fighting over scraps. And one night 2 men nearly killed each other over a piece of salted fish the size of a coin, their blood smearing the deck darker than tar, until the captain himself had to whip them apart, his voice cracking with fury. "We are brothers of the black flag, not dogs in the street." Yet the men's eyes told the truth. They were dogs, starving and desperate. And even brotherhood has limits when hunger presses bone against skin. The cook, desperate to stretch what little remained, mixed sawdust into the flour, boiling it into a paste that clung to bowls like glue. And when men complained, he snapped, "Eat or die, there's no third choice." They ate, but curses followed, mutiny whispering louder each night. One dawn, Rourke found a man dead in his hammock, his hand clutching his stomach, his lips black with bile. And the surgeon muttered, "Poison or hunger. It makes no difference." But when they searched the dead man's chest, they found a stolen loaf, half-molded teeth marks in its crust. The captain ordered it thrown overboard, but the crew growled, furious at waste. And one even leapt into the sea after it, thrashing madly until he sank without a sound. Fear curdled into something darker. At night, Rourke heard whispers. The captain hides food. The quartermaster eats better. The surgeon sells rations for coin. He tried to stamp them out. But hunger breeds madness. And by the 7th day, knives glinted in the dark more often than laughter. The storm came on the 8th day. Black clouds swallowing the horizon, rain slamming down in sheets, the wind howling like 1,000 ghosts. And though the men cursed and prayed, secretly Rourke welcomed it, for storms meant rainwater, and rainwater meant life. Buckets and sails were spread wide, catching the torrents, and men drank as if tasting heaven, water running down their throats and into their beards, their bodies shaking with relief. But the sea takes as much as it gives. And by nightfall, 2 masts had cracked, sails torn to ribbons, and 3 men lost to the waves, their screams swallowed by thunder. When the sea calmed, the Sea Viper limped, her timbers groaning, her crew hollow-eyed once more, their bellies no fuller than before. That night, huddled in the captain's cabin, Rourke and Keane studied the chart by lantern light, shadows deepening every line of their faces. "There's an island 2 days east," Rourke said, stabbing the map with his knife. "If it has fresh water, fruit, anything, we survive." Keane grunted. "And if it doesn't?" Rourke's eyes were hard. "Then we die with knives in our hands, not rotting like rats in the bilge." The captain nodded slowly, but there was no triumph in his eyes, only the weight of a man who knows every choice leads to graves. They turned the ship east, sails patchworked and weak, the crew too frail to haul lines without groans, and as the sun rose, the horizon stretched empty, the sea mocking them with its vast indifference. On the 2nd day, the cry went up, "Land!" Men staggered to the rail, eyes wide, throats raw with joy as green broke the endless blue, palms rising like a promise, beaches white as bone. The Sea Viper crept into the bay, anchors dropped, longboats lowered, and the men rowed with what little strength remained, the smell of earth and flowers filling their nostrils like paradise itself. They staggered ashore, falling to their knees, clawing at vines heavy with fruit, tearing coconuts from trees, drinking sweet water from a spring that bubbled clear and cold. They wept as they ate, their laughter ringing, their bellies swelling, But Rourke alone stood wary, cutlass in hand, scanning the jungle that loomed beyond the beach. Paradise, Keen muttered, between mouthfuls or a trap. Rourke said nothing, but his gut churned because the island was too still, too quiet, as if it waited. That night they built fires, roasted fish, sang until their voices cracked, joy reborn in their eyes. But as the flames burned low, a scream shattered the night. Men leaped to their feet, blades drawn, only to find one of their own writhing in the sand, his body swollen, his tongue black, the half-eaten fruit still in his hand. Poison. Panic erupted. Men throwing down fruit, cursing the island, some clawing at their throats as if to tear the sickness free. And by dawn, 3 more were dead, their bodies stiff on the beach. The surgeon shook his head, muttering, "Nature defends herself," and Keen spat into the sand. Paradise indeed. They buried the dead in shallow graves, the sea washing close, as if waiting to reclaim them. And though the crew still gathered coconuts and fish, fear tempered every bite, every swallow, until food was no longer relief, but gamble. Rourke stared at the jungle, its shadows thick, its silence heavy, and swore under his breath. Better the sea's hunger than the island's poison. But even as he spoke, the brush stirred, and eyes glimmered from the dark and familiar, watching, measuring. They were not alone. The jungle loomed before them like a wall of green fire, its canopy swallowing the sky. The air thick with a damp heat that clung to skin like a fever. And as dawn painted the horizon, Captain Elias Rourke led his men inland, cutlass in hand. Every step a reminder that paradise had teeth sharper than any cannonball. They moved cautiously, Keen at his side, the crew straggling behind, some eager for food, others wary after the poisoned fruit, all of them gaunt with hunger but sharpened by desperation. And the deeper they pushed, the thicker the silence grew, broken only by the squelch of boots in mud and the hiss of insects swarming their ears, until even the bravest looked back toward the safety of the beach. But there was no safety, there only shallow graves and dwindling rations. And so forward they went, hacking vines that bled sap like milk, startling parrots that shrieked overhead, their cries echoing like warnings. By midday, the heat pressed so heavy men collapsed against trunks, panting, tongues lolling. But Rourke drove them on, sensing water ahead. And when they stumbled into a clearing with a stream tumbling silver over rocks, relief roared through the ranks, men dropping to their knees, drinking deep, splashing their faces, laughter breaking like thunder. But even as they drank, Rourke's eyes caught something glinting on the stone's beads. Carved bone, the remnants of offerings laid in neat rows. And his gut tightened, for water blessed is water claimed, and water claimed is never free. Keen saw it too, muttering, "We're not alone here, Captain. And I'd wager my pistol they don't take kindly to thieves." As if summoned, the forest answered a sharp whistle, then a volley of arrows hissing from the trees, thudding into bark, slicing flesh, one man falling with a shaft through his neck, another screaming as his thigh was pinned to the earth. Panic erupted, men scrambling for cover, firing pistols blindly into the green, smoke curling uselessly into the canopy, while Rourke roared for order, dragging the wounded behind rocks, his cutlass gleaming, his eyes scanning for shapes in the shadows. And then he saw them, figures painted in ash and ochre, feathers rising like crowns, their bodies swift as panthers, their eyes hard as flint. They moved not like raiders, but like guardians defending sacred ground. And in that moment, Rourke understood they were intruders in a kingdom that belonged to others. And no flag, no cannon, no black sails could change that. "Hold your fire," he bellowed, voice cutting through the chaos, but the crew, maddened by fear, shot again. One musket ball tearing through a warrior's chest, and the jungle roared in fury. More arrows flew, more men fell, and the clearing became a charnel ground, blood mingling with the stream until its waters ran pink. Rourke grabbed Keen, dragging him back. "We can't win here." Back to the beach now. They retreated in a ragged line, firing as they fled, the jungle closing behind them like a throat-swallowing prey. Warriors flanking them unseen, their cries shrill, their steps silent, until at last the pirates burst onto the sand, gasping, bloodied, their numbers halved, their spirits shattered. The survivors collapsed by the longboats, too exhausted to row, their eyes wide with horror, while Rourke stood in the surf, chest heaving, his cutlass dripping crimson, staring back at the tree line where shadows lingered, watching. "They'll come for us," Keen rasped, his arm bound where an arrow had grazed him. "We've woken the island, Captain. We're dead men if we stay." Rourke clenched his jaw, his mind a storm. He knew Keen was right, yet to leave meant facing the sea with broken sails, scant water, and bellies empty once more. Already the men muttered, torn between terror of the island and terror of starvation, their voices rising with accusation. It was the captain's folly brought us here. We should have stayed to sea. Better to drown than be butchered in the trees. The word mutiny slithered like a serpent between their teeth, and Rourke saw in their eyes the same hunger that had nearly torn them apart before, the hunger not for food but for a scapegoat. He raised his cutlass high, its edge gleaming red in the sunset, and shouted, "Silence! You'll not break here, not while breath remains in your chests. We've faced storms, starvation, and steel, and we've bled together for survival. If you would turn knives inward, then kill me now, and let the sea take you. But if you'd live, then follow me, for I'll not bend to jungle, nor crown, nor hell itself." His voice cracked across the beach, and for a moment silence followed, the men swaying on the edge of rebellion, until Keen stepped forward, planting himself at Rourke's side, pistol raised. "Any man draws steel on the captain, draws it on me, and I'll see him dead before his knife leaves the sheath." Loyalty, raw and brutal, silenced the whispers, though the hatred lingered, waiting. That night, they posted double watches, eyes fixed on the dark tree line, every crack of a branch setting nerves on edge. And though the jungle did not strike again, its silence was worse than arrows, for silence meant patience, and patience meant inevitability. In the dark, Rourke unrolled the scorched ledger he had carried from Tortuga, its pages charred but legible, and as the firelight flickered, he traced names and debts, seeing how even here, even on a nameless island, the crown of thorns coiled around their fate like strangling roots, and he wondered if the jungle and the crown were different faces of the same truth, that men were never free, only prey to larger hungers. Sleep came fitful, haunted by dreams of webs and fangs, and when dawn broke, the beach smelled of smoke. Though no fire had been lit, Rourke rose, scanning the horizon, and froze. In the bay, where the sea viper had rested, only empty waves remained. The ship was gone. The sight of the empty bay struck harder than any broadside, for where the sea viper had floated proud, There was now only the endless shimmer of waves, mocking and merciless, and as the crew gathered on the sand, their faces pale and hollow, Rourke felt the truth crash into him with the weight of iron weather by storm. By treachery or by unseen hand, their ship was gone. Their only home, their only escape, their coffin and their cradle swallowed by the sea. And without her, they were not pirates but stranded beasts, a pack of wolves chained to a burning forest. For a long moment, no man spoke, the silence louder than cannon fire, until one broke with a voice raw from thirst. "We're dead men, Captain. The seas claimed us." Murmurs followed, louder, sharper, hunger and fear twisting into accusation. And soon knives glinted in the dawn, their points aimed not at the horizon but at Rourke himself, the captain whose command had led them into jungle arrows, poison fruit, and now abandonment. Keen roared for silence, pistol raised, but his voice only fueled the fire. And the crowd pressed tighter, eyes wild, mouths frothing with rage and terror, until at last Rourke strode into their circle, cutlass bare, his voice booming like thunder. "If you'd kill me, do it now. But know this, without me you are not a crew but carrion, meat for the jungle and bones for the tide. I have led you through storm and battle. I have bled as you bled. And I'll not be struck down by starving curs, too afraid to fight the sea that made them. Stand down, or I'll cut you myself." For a heartbeat the mob wavered, knives trembling, breaths ragged, until Keane stepped forward, pressing his pistol to the nearest man's temple, growling, "First one to twitch dies by my hand." The tension snapped like a taut rope, and slowly, one by one, blades lowered, though the hatred did not fade, only coiled deeper, waiting. Rourke sheathed his cutlass, though his heart pounded, and turned to the sea, his mind racing. Where had the sea viper gone? Desertion seemed impossible. No man aboard had the skill to sail her alone, nor the madness to strand himself. And yet she was gone all the same, stolen by tide or treachery, leaving them naked. That day, they scavenged the wreckage along the beach-splintered planks, broken crates, a single water cask half full and fouled with sand, a handful of powder horns, enough to arm but not to wage warrant. With these scraps they built fires, boiled what little they had, and tried to cling to discipline. But discipline on an empty stomach is a rope too thin to hold. And by nightfall men muttered again, their whispers carrying across the camp like smoke. Rourke sat apart, staring into the flames, the scorched ledger in his lap, and in its ink-black lines he saw not salvation but damnation. For though the sea viper was gone, the crown of thorns still bound them. And he wondered if this too was their hand, if Tortuga's web stretched even to this nameless shore, pulling strings to snuff him out like a candle. Keane sat beside him, silent for a long time, then muttered, "They'll mutiny, Captain. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Hunger makes beasts, and beasts eat their own." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Then we remind them they're wolves, not sheep. Wolves follow strength." Keane gave a bitter laugh. "Then we'd best pray you've strength enough for all." Morning came harsh and grey, the jungle steaming, the sea flat as glass, and as the men scavenged, a shout rose, "Sails! Sails to the west!" They ran to the shore, eyes straining, and sure enough, a ship crawled across the horizon, her masts tall, her hull lean, a predator cutting silent through the waves. Relief roared, but Rourke's stomach knotted, for her lines were too sharp, her sails too well kept, This was no fat merchantman ripe for plunder, but a frigate, and not any frigate, the St. Helene, a French hunter of pirates, a ship whose cannons had sent a dozen black flags to the deep. Down, Rourke hissed, dragging men back from the open shore. They'll see smoke, not men. Hide the fires. Panic rippled through the crew, men scattering into the trees, stamping out flames, clutching pistols useless against broadsides. And in the sudden hush, the jungle's silence pressed closer, broken only by the distant thunder of guns being run out on a ship that hadn't yet seen them, but might at any heartbeat. The frigate circled wide, her sails straining, her crew ants against the pale canvas, and then she vanished behind a headland. Gone but not forgotten, her presence like a noose tightening. They'll land, Keen muttered. They'll search, and when they find us. He didn't finish, and he didn't have to. The men knew. That night no one slept. The air stank of fear, of sweat, of piss. And more than once Rourke caught eyes gleaming in firelight, measuring his throat for a blade. By dawn, 2 men were gone, their hammocks empty, their tracks leading into the jungle. Desertion, or something worse. A search found only torn scraps, blood, and silence. Whispers grew louder. The island takes who it wants. Better them than me. By noon, another man vanished, and by dusk the crew refused to leave the beach at all. Huddling together like animals, clutching cutlasses they no longer trusted each other to hold. Rourke felt the rot spreading, faster than hunger, faster than thirst rot in their brotherhood, rot in their souls. On the 3rd night, it snapped. A knife flashed in the firelight, aimed for Rourke's heart. But Keen's pistol barked first, the would-be mutineer falling back with his skull split, and chaos erupted, men leaping to their feet, steel clashing, curses roaring, the camp becoming a battlefield as pirates turned on pirates. Hunger and madness loosed at last. Rourke fought like a demon, his cutlass carving arcs of blood, his voice lost in the fury, and when, at last, silence fell, the beach was strewn with corpses, the firelight gleaming off eyes that would never close again. Half the crew lay dead, the other half too shocked to speak, and Rourke stood amid the ruin, chest heaving, cutlass dripping, his face pale with horror at what they had done. Not killed Spaniards, not slain enemies, but butchered brothers. Ashes of brotherhood, Keen whispered, his voice shaking, and Rourke knew the name would never leave him. They burned the bodies on pyres, the smoke rising thick, carrying their sins into the night, and as flames devoured flesh, the jungle answered not with arrows this time, but with drums, deep and slow, beating like the heart of the island. Boom, 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 the sound froze every man, their eyes turning to the trees where shadows stirred. And out of the darkness came torches, dozens, scores, an army of painted warriors stepping silent onto the sand, their faces unreadable, their spears gleaming, their numbers far beyond the ragged handful of pirates who remained. The drums ceased. The fire crackled, and then a single voice rose from the ranks, speaking words none of them understood, but whose meaning was clear as death. Judgment had come. The painted warriors stood in silence, their torches painting the beach in fire and shadow, and the ragged handful of pirates who remained clutched their blades with trembling hands, their bodies exhausted from mutiny, their bellies hollow from hunger, their souls raw from betrayal. And as the drums fell silent, the only sound was the crackle of pyres where their dead shipmates burned, smoke mingling with the stench of fear. Rourke stood at their front, his cutlass slick, keen at his side. Both men knowing that this was no battle they could win. 30 gaunt pirates against 100 warriors who moved with the unity of a single heartbeat. Their spears steady, their eyes unflinching, but the die on knees was not in Rourke's marrow. And so he raised his blade high, voice thunderous in the firelight. "If you'd have us, then take us in blood." Yet the warriors did not charge. Instead, one stepped forward, tall and broad, his skin painted black save for a white crown drawn across his brow. A chieftain whose gaze was colder than steel, and he spoke in a tongue none understood. Yet his gesture was clear. He pointed at the pyres, then at Rourke, then at the sea, and with a wave of his hand, the warriors lowered their weapons. Confusion rippled through the pirates, whispers rising, until Keen muttered, "They don't want our deaths." Not yet. The warriors approached slowly, surrounding them, binding their wrists with vines, taking their blades, and though some fought back, a crack of clubs silenced resistance, and soon the pirates were marched into the jungle. Firelight fading behind them, drums beginning again. Slow and steady, the rhythm of fate. They stumbled through the dark for what felt like hours, vines tearing their skin, insects biting, the air thick with the musk of earth and rot, until the trees opened into a vast clearing lit by 100 torches, where huts ringed a central fire pit, large enough to swallow a longboat whole. The warriors' village, alive with shadows, alive with eyes. Women and children watched from doorways, their faces painted with the same symbols, and the chieftain raised his hand, silence falling like a blade, before speaking words that carried across the fire. A chant rose in answer, deep and haunting, and though Rourke understood not a syllable, the meaning pressed heavy on his chest. Judgment, ritual, sacrifice. The pirates were thrown to the ground, their wrists bound tighter, their bodies shaking, and as the chanting grew, Rourke's eyes darted across the crowd, catching sight of carvings, wooden idols crowned with thorns, spiders etched into bark, symbols too familiar, too terrible, for he had seen them in Lafitte's ledgers. In the parchment pinned by a dagger in Tortuga, the crown of thorns. His breath caught. His mind relinquered. The same marks stretch from Tortuga's taverns to this nameless island, across seas and cultures. A web spun wider than he had ever imagined. Keen, following his gaze, swore under his breath, "It's them, Captain. Christ's bones, it's always been them." Before Rourke could answer, the chieftain barked a command, and 2 warriors dragged forth a carcass, one of the dead pirates, charred black from the pyre, his flesh splitting. His body limpand with solemn reverence, they laid him upon the fire pit, the chanting swelling, the air heavy with smoke and heat. Horror rippled through the pirates, some retching, others cursing, and when the flames rose, crackling around burnt flesh, Rourke realized with dawning dread that this was no funeral, it was a feast. The warriors pulled knives of bone, carving charred flesh, passing pieces to one another, consuming their enemies as part of their ritual, their faces gleaming with firelight and sweat. And though every pirate gagged at the sight, none could deny the deeper truth. Hunger was universal. Hunger bound even the most different of men. And in that moment, Rourke saw the line between pirate and predator blur into smoke. The chieftain approached, holding a piece aloft, and with deliberate intent offered it to Rourke. Silence smothered the clearing, every eye upon him, and Rourke felt the weight of the world pressing down. To refuse might mean death, to accept would be to join in horror. Slowly, he extended his bound hands, took the charred flesh and raised it to his lips, his stomach twisting, his throat rebelling. But his will iron, he bit, chewed, swallowed, his eyes never leaving the chieftain's. A murmur rippled through the crowd, half approval, half anticipation, and one by one the other pirates were forced to partake, their faces pale, their eyes haunted, until all had eaten. The chant shifted, faster now, more frenzied, and the bonds were cut from their wrists, not as mercy, but as invitation. The feast continued, warriors dancing, drums pounding, and pirates sat among them, dazed, horrified, their hands shaking as they drank fermented fruit, their minds reeling between survival and damnation. Rourke sat apart, staring into the fire, bile in his throat, the taste of ash and blood on his tongue, his soul sickened but his body alive. And he whispered to Keen, "We've stepped into hell, and the devil wears a crown of thorns." Keen spat, his face pale. "Aye, but the devil feeds his flock." Better than starving, they stayed through the night, watched by eyes that never blinked, until dawn bled across the clearing, and the chieftain summoned them again, speaking words that were translated not by tongue but by gesture. They would live. For now, but they were no longer free. They were bound to the village, bound to the ritual, bound to the hunger. And as the pirates staggered to their feet, their numbers dwindled to fewer than 20. Rourke knew that freedom had slipped through their fingers like sand, that survival had come at a cost heavier than death. For they were no longer men of the sea, but guests at a table that promised only more horror. That night, as the village slept, Rourke sat awake, staring at the idols, the spider's crown etched deep into their wood, and a thought coiled like a serpent in his mind. What if the crown of thorns was not merely men in Tortuga, nor smugglers, nor governors, but something older, something rooted in hunger itself, binding men across oceans, binding them to the same endless feast of blood? And if so, how could any blade ever cut free? His thoughts were broken by a scream, one of the pirates dragged from his hut, his body beaten, his throat bared to a knife, and though Rourke rushed forward, spears blocked him, the chieftain raising his hand in silence before driving the blade deep, blood spilling into the earth as the crowd roared. Rourke's fists clenched, his heart hammering as he realized the truth. This was not survival. This was slaughter, drawn out, ritualized, made spectacle, and they were next in line. Dawn bled across the jungle village like a wound that would not heal, the air thick with smoke from dying torches and the stench of blood still, soaking the earth where the last sacrifice had fallen. And the pirates who remained, barely more than a dozen gaunt, hollow-eyed wretches, sat in silence, their souls shredded, their bodies trembling, their hearts beating only because fate refused to end them yet. Rourke stood apart, his face ash-grey, Keen at his side, both men knowing that every breath was borrowed, every heartbeat another step closer to a knife's edge. And as the painted warriors stirred to life, their chieftain strode forward, raising a hand that silenced even the birds, speaking words in his guttural tongue that needed no translation, for he pointed at the pirates, then at the horizon, then at the idols crowned with thorns that ringed the clearing. And Rourke understood. They were not prisoners, here they were offerings in waiting, pawns in a cycle that stretched beyond this island, beyond the jungle, beyond even the sea itself. For the crown of thorns was no mere brotherhood of smugglers or conspirators in Tortuga's taverns. It was something older, something that spanned oceans, its roots digging into men and empires alike. A web woven of hunger, blood, and fear, and now that web had caught them whole. The realization struck like a cannonball, but there was no time to ponder, for the drums began again, deep and steady, and the warriors moved to bind them, dragging the pirates toward the fire pit once more. Panic erupted, men thrashing, screaming. Curses spat into the morning air, but spears pressed against throats silenced them quick, until only Rourke's voice carried, fierce as ever. Enough, you want sacrifice? Then take me, but let my men go free. The chieftain's eyes fixed on him. Unreadable, then with a slow shake of his head, he raised a hand, and the warriors seized Rourke himself, dragging him to the pit, laying him across the blackened stones where his brothers had burned. Keen lunged forward, pistol snapping, the shot tearing through a warrior's skull. Chaos erupting in an instant, pirates surging, warriors howling, spears clashing with steel, smoke billowing as huts caught fire. And in that madness, Rourke broke free, cutlass flashing, blood spraying, his roar a thunderclap as he cut a path toward Keen, their eyes locking in shared fury and desperation. To the sea, Rourke bellowed, and together they drove their men, slashing through warriors, their boots pounding the dirt, their lungs burning, the village collapsing in flame behind them, screams rising from both sides as bodies fell until the jungle swallowed them whole, branches whipping, arrows hissing, blood-staining leaves, the chase a nightmare of sweat and terror. They stumbled onto the beach at last, the horizon blazing with the fire of the rising sun, and there anchored where the Sea Viper had once been was a ship. Not the French frigate, not a stranger, but the Sea Viper herself, her black sails furled, her hull scarred but intact, floating silent as if she had never left. The crew froze, disbelief etched across their faces, hope crashing like a wave, and then terror, for on her prow hung bodies, nailed and bleeding, their eyes hollow, their chests split, and in their wounds were carved the same symbol, the crown of thorns. The ship had returned, but it was no longer theirs, it was claimed. Figures moved on her deck, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden, their hands marked with the thorn sigil, and as they lowered boats, rowing toward the shore with grim precision, Rourke felt the full weight of truth slam into him. The crown of thorns had taken their ship, their freedom, their very fate, and they had been herded here, like cattle, for a purpose that reached far beyond survival. Keen spat, loading his last pistol. It was never the island, was it, Captain? It was them all along. Rourke's eyes blazed, his cutlass trembling in his grip. Aye, and now we see their faces. The boats grounded, the hooded figures rising, their leader stepping forward, pulling back his hood to reveal a face. Rourke knew Governor Lafitte himself. Tortuga Spider, smiling cold and cruel. Captain Rourke, he drawled, his voice a whip of silk and venom. You've danced long enough. The crown thanks you for your service. Your debt is paid in blood, and your crew has served its purpose. The web tightens, and you, my dear wolf, are caught at last. The pirates snarled, weapons raised, but they were few, broken. And the hooded men advanced in silence, their blades gleaming, their numbers overwhelming. The warriors of the island stood at the tree line, watching, not interfering, for even they bowed to the greater hunger. And Rourke realized with a hollow dread that all along, the jungle, the island, the crown, they were threads of the same tapestry, strands of the same web, and there was no breaking free. Still, defiance burned in his chest, brighter than fear, and he raised his cutlass high, shouting with every last shred of his soul, "Then let the web bleed." The pirates roared, a final cry, and they charged. Steel against steel, the beach erupting in slaughter as the sun rose higher, casting their shadows long and red across the sand. The clash was fury and despair. Every blow a heartbeat, every scream a prayer. And though Rourke fought like a demon, carving a path toward Lafitte, the weight of the crown bore down, spears and blades closing in, blood soaking the shore. At last he faced Lafitte, their blades clashing, sparks flying, hatred blazing in their eyes, and with a cry Rourke drove his cutlass deep butt as the blade struck. Lafitte only laughed, blood spilling, his smile wide. "The crown does not die with me, wolf. The web has no end." He collapsed, but already more hooded figures surged, dragging Rourke down, his cutlass wrenched from his hand. His crew cut apart one by one until only silence remained, broken by the endless crash of waves. And then darkness. When Rourke opened his eyes, he was no longer on the beach, but chained in a dark hold. The creak of timbers above, the stench of brine and rot filling his nostrils. He pulled against iron manacles, his wrists bleeding, and in the shadows around him he saw his surviving crew, bound, broken, silent. A voice echoed in the dark, smooth and eternal. "You are not dead, Captain. Death is mercy. You are ours now. The crown sails every sea, claims every soul, feeds every hunger, and you will feed it too." Chains rattled, the sound stretching into infinity, and Rourke screamed, his voice swallowed by the black, the truth crashing in like a final wave. There was no escape, no freedom, only the web, eternal and unbroken, and the pirate who had defied kings, storms, and starvation was nothing more than prey caught forever in the crown's jaws.